Today's topic is playing with and against the isolated pawn. And I am going to use 3 different examples from none other than former world champion Anatoly Karpov. And I think that this is pretty instructive. I think that if you pay attention to the lecture, you can definitely pick up some ideas about piece play and about pawn structure. Actually, there's a little anecdote here that he played the same variation, almost the same variation, very similar, very cosmetic difference, twice, once in 1971 in the game in front of us against Vasily Smyslov, another former world champion. And in this game, he lost. And I've seen this game presented, it was even presented here at the club by someone who remained nameless. And the main variation somehow behind the scene was not mentioned. And the funny thing is that I'm assuming that he knew about it at some point, because 4 years later, he still played the same variation, made the same mistake as black, and this time he actually faced the most challenging answer. And funny enough, that game he managed to draw somehow. So, okay, without further ado, we'll start with the lecture. We have a symmetrical English. You will see that the position that we are going to arrive is the kind of position that you can arrive from different openings. The opening in the second game was a Nimzo-Indian. This is an English, and you can also get to it from a Karo-Khan pawn of Botvinnik attack. The pawn structure is exactly the same, just the move order is different. So, okay, of course, in an English we have many, many possibilities. In this position, many moves have been tried. D4, E4, G3 are the more common ones nowadays. But here he plays a very quiet variation, E3. Again, it's a quiet line, but not without venom. You have to really respect it. Of course, the idea is to support D4 and to be able to take with the pawn. Even though this is an isolated pawn, some people like it, Smyslov liked it, and watch what happens. So E6, again, other moves are G6 and knight takes C3 in the spirit of a Grunfeld. So D4, the point. Pawn takes. Needless to say that knight takes C3 is just nothing to write home about from White's point of view, just a bad pawn structure. So he takes with the pawn, and this is where things begin. We can see that already a statement was made. White was willing to isolate his center pawn, which means there are no pawns on the adjacent EOC files. And the point is that his 2 bishops are ready for action, and there's going to be a use of the semi-open E file, maybe sometimes the C file, depending on the needs and circumstances. Black, on the other hand, has a much better pawn structure, only 2 islands of pawns, but his bishop on C8 is the real bad boy of the family. And you'll see that you have to find a little bit of imagination of how to develop it. So, bishop E7, again a normal move. Bishop D3, obviously the correct and proper plan. Castles, castles, knight C6, rook E1. I moved those moves relatively fast because, again, this is the tabia, this is the main position, the first starting position. And you can see White, like promised, conquered the semi-open file. He developed his minors, as did Black. And again, when you look at this position, again, one thing that is kind of accentuated is the bishop on C8. The bishop on C8 is a real problem child. What to do, how to develop it. So, okay, in this position, Black played knight F6, and I want to mention several lines. One line, of course, is another main line that's very typical today, is to play bishop F6, hit the pawn on D4 at once. White plays bishop E4, a double purpose move of defending the pawn. Now the queen is defending the D pawn, and the queen is going to come to D3. So, for example, after knight E7, because, well, probably Black doesn't want to be given his isolated pawn of his own. So the knight moves back to defend. Queen D3 attacking H7, G6, and again the game goes very normal. Bishop H6, rook E8, rook A D1. Black can play for B6 and develop his bishop, or bishop D7 and bishop C6. And again, that's a chess game, but just not the topic for today. I can tell you that I once had this position as Black myself when I was pretty high rated, about 23 something. I knew nothing about this position, just stumbled upon it. I just played moves, we got to here. I forget what the opening was, probably something similar to this. And I said to myself, well, I have one problem, and that's going to be the bishop. How do I develop the bishop? So I played the move B6. This is not a very good move here. And the reason is, it's really good to know that after knight D5, just about the last move I expected back then, White is in really good shape. Because if you can see, there is a combination of two motifs. You can see that there's pressure against h7, and there's going to be pressure against c6. So if he takes with a queen, then there's going to be an idea like bishop e4 and queen c2, doubly attacking c6 and h7. After long thought in the game, I played e takes d5, and after bishop h7 check, king takes, queen c2 check, king back, he took my knight. Well, I can tell that here I was very relaxed because I knew I was lost. Well, I'm not going to tell you too much about this game except that I won it somehow, but that has nothing, I won it. I won it because somehow I managed to push my pawns on the queen side, put something on c4, and he took, and my d-pawn went here. Miracles. Okay, but my opponent was not very high rated. It was maybe 2200. So all kinds of miracles happen. So in any event, b6, the point is that b6 here is not a good move. That's why they have to find a creative solution. And Karpov played the third common move in the position, which is knight f6. He simply relinquishes the center, saying, okay, I'm going to defend h7. I'm not going to allow knight captures d5. And now I can play b6 without any headaches. Okay, so on we go. And again, the game continues thematically. a3. Why a3? White wants to build a battery of queen and bishop on the long diagonal, the b1, h7 diagonal. And we don't need any knight b4s to mess up with this idea. We don't like it, we don't want it, and therefore a3 is a worthy tempo. It's a really good tempo to spend. So Karpov played b6, perfect. Bishop c2. Again, very, very normal. The idea is I want my queen to be in front of my bishop. Of course, when you have a queen-bishop battery, sometimes you play queen c2, and the battery is where the bishop is in front. But here you definitely want your queen to be in front because you are, well, as simple as it may sound, you want to give checkmate. And you'll see how much trouble one side can get to when they're not paying attention. So in this position, I have never really seen it, although I must admit that I'm not a world expert on this opening, but I think that bishop a6 is a very annoying move if you're white. Because you really, really want to put your queen on d3, and then the bishop comes out without problem, and the rook comes to d1, and everything is almost like a puzzle that just gets formed. So if I play a move like bishop a6, I'm not proud of this bishop. I'd much rather have my bishop on this diagonal. But I know one thing, the queen is not coming to d3. So that's, in my opinion, it has some value, some worth. Sorry, there's water here somehow, but I'll figure it out in a second. That's an inheritance that I got from somewhere. Yes, sir?
After bishop a6, can I play b4?
Can you play b4? Good question. With the idea of b5, huh?
Yeah.
And if I'm to play knight d5, back to d5 one more time?
Knight e4.
Knight e4. Okay, let's take a look. I mean, I'm curious. So let's say bishop, oh wait. Is it going to allow me? Yeah. So bishop a6, we're saying b4. And on knight d5, you want to play this. Okay, now you're not threatening b5, right? I mean, that's one thing. So if I went, let's say, rook c8, or just played normal chess, or even played g6 at some moment, I don't have to do it right now. Probably rook c8 I can play right here. So also, maybe I can play bishop c4 and b5, and maybe there's some value to try to leave the bishop here. Even if it gets traded, maybe there could be a pawn here. Maybe, I don't know. But I know the bishop a6 was recommended not just by me, by someone else. So, but maybe it's even a book move here, I just don't know it. But again, this is not the topic that we have. In the game, he played normally with bishop to b7. White played queen d3. Now, my advice to you, and I know that Karpov knows it by now because twice he fell into the same thing, that when this happens, you better play g6. It's really a good idea to play g6. Yeah, maybe you're not crazy about weakening your position, and maybe you don't feel like allowing bishop h6 with a tempo, and after the rook moves, then the rook comes to d1, just like we said before, because white really gets a pretty comfy game. But again, it's really a question of taste more than anything. Because normally when I have an isolated pawn, I'm already starting to sweat. I really don't like it. But this specific position, I've played several times, after g6, bishop h6, rook e8, rook a d1, I feel pretty comfortable about it. Later on, I play bishop b3, and I try to get d5 in. It's kind of an interesting game. In any event, our beloved Karpov played rook c8. And again, when you don't know, you think, okay, what can be wrong about this move? In this position, if you show it, let's say, to a beginner's class, you will say the following. Okay, both sides stake some claim in the center, either directly, like white. Did something happen? What? Oh, okay.
That's fine. How are you?
It's actually better. Okay. So, yeah, both sides claim stake the claim in the center. White has a direct control with the pawn on d4. Black is just criticizing the center well with the rest of his pieces. All the minors are developed for black. His pawn structure is as good as it gets. His king looks pretty safe. And, well, white still has to resolve the solution of what to do with his bishop. So black says, okay, my minors are developed, my king is safe, my center is as good as it gets. Let me start by moving my rook to the open file. And how can an innocent move like this by someone who's about to be world champion in a few years and already a candidate, how can this be bad? And the reason is that, again, it's good to understand how sensitive the center and the king sides are. The funny thing is that in this position, Smyslov played bishop g5, and the game was still very good. As a matter of fact, I think that Ben Feingold, even when he was talking about legends of the game and he did a Smyslov lecture, I think he showed this game, and with bishop g5. But as a matter of fact, bishop g5 here is by far not the best move. The best move is d5. And this is a thematic move that's really worth knowing if you ever play with or against the isolated pawn. Because it looks like, well, it almost looks like the most ridiculous move in the position. Because you just count. Black has 1, 2, 3 defenders. You have only 1, and then behind it 2. There's no way you can push your pawn to d5. But as a matter of fact, you can. The reason behind it is very simple. Well, primitively speaking, I'm about to take your knight. You better do something about that. And I'm also about to take your pawn on e6. So this is a little bit of a headache here. And, well, let's take a look at some of the variations. Taking, of course, is the main line. Let's leave it for a second. If he tries to avoid taking it, but knight a5, white has two pleasant choices. He can play bishop g5, which is really, really nice. Now, I have a very strong recommendation, and that is to give up an exchange on c3. Because if you don't invest your rook on c3, this is going to become very, very painful. Of course, I just want to play bishop takes knight and then mate. And if you try to play g6 now, I'm going to play d6, and you're going to lose a piece. Because the queen is not going to be able to defend both the bishop that's going to take here and here. Or if you take with the queen, I trade, then I win the knight. So this is really bad news. And therefore, in view of that, the only move that I can think of is really rook takes c3, queen takes c3, queen takes d5. Okay, when you ask me who I want to be, I think I want to be white, obviously. Black has at least some play. Two agile bishops that are, maybe you can try something, but white also has a pair of bishops, so it's an exchange for a pawn. I'd rather be white, obviously. Alternatively, white can also, instead of bishop g5, he can also take on here, and after pawn takes, just queen e2. And I can't tell you that I'm crazy about black's position with the pawn on e6 and one knight there, one knight there. Looks a bit messy, and I would prefer to be white. So this is very, very bad news. Probably going to lose a pawn. So this is very, very bad news. And now, of course, the big question, why can't you just take the down pawn? It looks like you can, of course, you cannot take with the knight or the queen. You can take with the queen because they have a knight, and you can take with the knight because there's a mate on h7. But why not take with the pawn? Because now, bishop g5. Now you have a really nice headache. What to do now? Probably knight e4, but I mean, I don't know what to suggest. You'll see in the other game, it's also something like this. If g6, simply rook takes e7, of course. And now, if knight takes e7, bishop takes f6. Not only am I winning two pieces for a rook, but your kingside looks like really Swiss cheese, right? It's going to be terrible on the dark squares. And if you take with the queen, then knight takes d5, attacking the queen and the knight. Well, I don't think you can move your queen because I'm going to play knight takes f6. It's going to be complete murder. So you got to sack the queen. Takes, bishop b3, I guess, in this position. And, well, white is up a queen for a rook and a minor piece. I mean, with pawns on both sides and still more pieces on the board, if I didn't win this with white, I would be quite miffed. So this is really looking very, very strong. Just for historical value, I'll also show you what happened in the game. He played bishop g5 and g6, rook a d1. So the game kind of continued in the spirit of the position. White brings all his resources to the open file and files and diagonals. And of course, at one point, he wants to play the move d5. That's his point. He wants to explode in the center when all his pieces are good and ready. So he played knight here, bishop h6, rook here, bishop a4. Again, using the two bishops for pressure in the center. And now Karpov played the move that, in my opinion, is second best. Definitely, he should have gone for the variation where he wins a pawn, and Smyslov has to prove that he has compensation for it. And the idea was knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, bishop takes pawn on a3, and white plays c4. And that's the big question, how to evaluate this position. When you put it in the computer and let it work for a little bit, it says, okay, maybe white has compensation, but he's not necessarily winning. So a good idea here would be like bishop b4, tickling this rook. When the rook moves away and kind of interferes with the other rook, then bishop back to f8, trading bishops, and okay, black has a tenable position. Instead, Karpov played a6. And this, in my opinion, is not so good. Now came knight takes d5. You will notice that the idea of a6 looks very naive, and you think, how can it be bad? But I want you to pay close attention to the pawn on b6. Right now, it's not even attacked once, but you'll see that it's trouble. So, of course, you can play e takes d5, but I'm sure you can see that after e takes d5, not only do both sides have an isolated pawn, so you kind of even the score immediately, but your bishop on b7 is a real doofus. He's really behind his own chain of pawns, and only the Lord knows how he's ever going to be revived. My bishop, however, is really an attacking bishop. First, I'm pinning. Second of all, I can always land here and really be on this pawn forever. And I have more space, and my pieces are more active. Not pleasant to play e takes d5. So the point, of course, is to play queen takes d5. And in this position, Karpov played a really strong move. I mean, Smyslov played a really strong move. Queen e3. An excellent restrained move, because the intention, of course, is to play bishop to b3. But then, of course, queen h5, tempo, and attacking the bishop. Now the queen moved towards a, protecting the bishop. And also notice that it'll be eyeing the pawn on b6. Now, of course, the queen is not going to stay here forever, because I'm going to kick it out in a second. So watch how the game continues. He played bishop f6. If he moves queen h5 now, then after d5, this is really bad news all around. And for example, here, already one example where the pawn on b6 is falling. And this is really a terrible position for black. All these pieces are in disarray. Sure, you can take this bishop, but I will take yours. And this is weak, this is weak, this is weak. Everything is weak. And the weakness for white is just untouchable. Now, this is really bad news. Alternatively, instead of taking, bishop c5 can be played, and then queen f4. Again, just a beautiful position in this. Here takes, here. This illustrates only one of the problems that black can have in this position. His queen is being sent to oblivion, and queen takes f7 is coming. And this is complete demise of the black position. So back we go a little bit. After here and queen e3. And he played bishop f6. So bishop to b3, queen h5, and d5. Now that the black position is really critical. You really got to commend Smyslov for playing, once he played bishop g5 and didn't play his d5, okay, he got a mistake with a6, and now you can see that the position is just untenable. Pawn takes, queen takes e8 is just made. So he tried knight d8. And here Smyslov played a move that I think was second best. He played d6. What should he have done? Let me remember. He had something really good here. Huh. Maybe queen f4? Yeah, I think it was queen f4. Okay, I mean, d6 is also winning, so it's really hard to criticize a move that eventually wins. But I think he had like something pretty immediate here, which I think queen f4 was it. Anyways, d6 threatening d7. So rook c5, only move. d7, rook e7, queen f4 again, taking the bishop on f6, and also wanting to go to b8. After bishop g7, just takes, just queen b8, threatening to take on d8. So, yeah, here, 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 here. And now this was just lost. And Karpov had to resign. So a pretty good performance by Smyslov. And again, we see, just to bring you back very quickly so you remember the typical motif here, because I'm going to show you the second game is going to be just the same, that in a position like this, he played rook to c8. Okay, so, kill this game, fast forward 5 years, or 4 years? 4 years. And he is playing Grandmaster Lajos Portisch from Hungary, who was, again, one of the top players in the world. You can already see that he's not that far behind Karpov, and Karpov was already world champion. So, this time is a Nimzo-Indian, but can you close the door? Thank you. But you will see that we are getting to exactly the same position and the same structure, with a slight difference that the bishop is on b4. So takes, 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 b6. Again, white is accepting the opening where he plays with the isolated pawn. Again, getting diagonals and files free. Black is getting pressure against the pawn. So rook e1, bishop e7, bishop goes back to d3, knight c6, a3, bishop e7, bishop c2. Yeah, just to show a variation why bishop c2 is really relevant, because if you just play normal, like develop the last minor piece, and I'm going to play the move that I want to play anyways, bishop c2, rook e8, queen d3, g6, I'm just in time. Everything is just perfect. Black has just managed to, I'm not saying this is a terrible position for white, no. But this is exactly the kind of position that black is hoping for. So after bishop e7, he plays bishop c2. Again, I should mention bishop a6. Even here, even though the bishop is on b7, it still may be worth losing a tempo to not allow bishop queen d3. But he played rook e8, queen d3, and I'm sure that by now you're almost programmed, I hope, to know that g6 is necessary. You have to do something. Yeah, sure, the bishop can get a good square on h6, whereas before he didn't have that many good squares, but I think it's a necessity. In the game, once again, he plays, guess what? Rook c8. Must look familiar, right? This looks really familiar. Same move in the same typical position, the same type of a position. And if you remember last time, Smyslov played bishop g5, but here Portisch, without hesitation, played d5. So, again, we already know about the idea of knight a5. I mentioned it before. Well, we know that you cannot take with knight d5, that's obvious. And after this, again, we have either this and this, which is already, as promised, much better for white, an advantage in material, or, excuse me, takes, takes, and queen e2 one more time, where white is putting tons of pressure against the e-pawn. The black structure is much, much worse than before. It's so much better when you have a pawn on f7, and your opponent has an isolated pawn on d4. Here white got rid of the isolated pawn, and black got himself a bad pawn of his own with nothing to show for it. Nothing special to show. So, okay, we understand that. So Karpov decided to take bishop g5. Now, the critical position. We already know that after g6, rook takes e7 is just horrible. You just lose material on the spot. So he decided to make things more complicated with the move knight e4. The only move in the position. And of course, this move returns the pawn, but in the same spirit, you will see that it's necessary. You have to do it, otherwise you're going to lose more. So takes, takes, takes. Once again, threatening checkmate on h7 and h8. So g6, and he plays the most natural move in the position, I think, queen h4. At first glance, you look at the position and you might say to yourself, how bad can this be? After all, some of the white pieces seem a bit remote, like the knight is still here, the bishop is here, this rook is not playing, and it looks like all the black pieces are around, and the weaknesses don't seem to be so terrible. A queen by itself obviously cannot just win this against this structure. But watch what happened in this game, and you will see what Portisch missed, which is semi-obvious in my opinion, and you will understand. Now, what to do? In the game he played h5, but you will see that it's really hard to suggest moves here, because bishop takes, knight takes, h5, bishop b3, for example, or rook a d1 first, and it's just hard to hold the position. I put this position in the computer in Stockfish 6 just to see how terrible it is, and it's already giving big numbers. And with every move, it just grows and grows and grows. The position is just indefensible. And since we don't have 10 hours to analyze all the variations behind the scenes, even though it's really worth looking up this game and analyzing it with a computer, because I can tell you that even for me, having shown this game and seen this game, now that the computers are so strong, you can really learn, you can still learn new things. I saw some variations that were just astonishing. For example, the person that annotated this game is a grandmaster, and he made mistakes because he just didn't appreciate some lines that the computers give. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. So h5, and bishop e3 is good, whatever. He played rook a d1, also very good. Yes?
Bishop a4 also.
Bishop where?
A4.
Listen, maybe it is, but you know, it's like, I can tell you that after rook d1, you are really gonna like it. I think when you see the variation, I think you're gonna say, listen, I don't care about bishop a4. Because even if it works, this is just so nice. But I can tell you that the annotator give this a question mark. But if you notice it, I change it. Now it's, after this, I give it an exclam. Because this is the best move, rook a d1. And queen c7, what else? And again, in this position you think, okay, so now what? Yeah, sure, white got some of his pieces into the game. Again, you think maybe in terms of bishop b3 or bishop a4. But now the game gets really fun. And I have to tell you that initially when I saw the move, I was like, wow, I really didn't expect that. But it's very deceiving. So he played, wow, really not exactly the first move that you would expect. I remember the annotator saying that Portisch thought that he was winning after this move, hinting that he was wrong. However, he is not wrong. This move is totally winning. So pawn takes, and he did queen c4 check. The correct move would have been to play rook e6. After this, there is just no defense. You put in the computer and it's something like +6 or something in favor of white. That's pretty convincing. You can't argue with numbers like this. But you look at it. I mean, when you look at the position, it's like, yeah, the black king looks funny, but there isn't that much firepower. I mean, if there was still a light square bishop now somewhere, you'd say, yeah, of course. But as it is now, it looks really hard to believe. But watch, here's the main line that is given by the computer to play here. That's what, by the way, the annotator back then thought he was the refutation because of the mate threat. But the computer just says here, and there is no defense. After here, check, here, and now he plays the very aesthetic move that's like so many captures, so many possibilities, he just plays this. Beautiful. And after here, here, and now I think it's +10. Now, okay, now I think it's easier to understand because the black king looks a little, how should I say, exposed. I mean, two pieces or not, I'm threatening queen h7 and rook g8. I'm threatening the bishop on g5, who is a gunner. And once the bishop goes, I already have 3 pawns for the piece, plus my pieces are attacking. So, rook c6 is threatened, of course, exactly. It's deluxe threats galore. I think here, the move that, what move did the computer suggest here? Let me think. He suggested something, but what was it? Of course, it's not, I didn't pay close attention when I saw it was already +9 or, but he made some move that just allows taking this with maybe king e7? Okay, but of course it's just the whole thing is ridiculous. So, shamefully in the game, he played queen c4 check instead. Again, a move that looks very, very reasonable. But after king g7, bishop f4, Again, this is what Portisch was counting on, and now he has, again, a million threats on the position. What he didn't see was this. This somehow discombobulates the whole position. The queen needs to be in touch defending the bishop on f4. So all the aspiration of coming to maybe e6 or f7 in some lines, that's all gone now. So of course, queen takes a6, queen takes f4, it's just a real disappointment. So he had to try check, and then of course, since your queen is under attack, you have to block with a threat. And again, the bishop is under attack. If you just keep moving back, you down a piece and black is going to coordinate. So he took here, took this, and then he had to take here. And for a moment, it may look like white is up a pawn, but it really is, it's nothing. The pawn structure is so bad, and material is about to be reduced, and it's just not enough. After bishop e2, rook here, he took and took. Okay, I mean, this is very, very good chance to draw. Again, even the computer says that this is like just about equal. And it was just drawn very quickly. After here, here. It's just impossible for white to create anything with his pass pawn. I mean, his extra pawn is like just not worth it. And they agreed to a draw somewhere around here. I think exactly here. Because white just gave up on trying to advance his position. Okay, so again, we saw two examples by Karpov where he was playing with the against the isolated pawn, and he didn't do too well. I mean, here he barely survived with the draw. In the other game, even though his opponent didn't play the best, he still managed to somehow lose. But now I will show you an example from his World Championship match against Korchnoi in 1981. They had many games that had isolated pawn, but this is one where Korchnoi was probably at his worst. Already in this position, black is for choice, because as you should know, when you are playing with the isolated pawn, one of the things that are big no-nos is don't trade minor pieces. The more minor pieces you trade, the more accentuated the weakness of the isolated pawn becomes. It's much easier to attack. There are no pieces to enjoy the open diagonals. And as far as files go, it's really hard to use files when you are about to lose a pawn and just have your position cave, where the position just caves in. So in this position, it's black to move. And I think that he played a very, very instructive plan. Again, I'm not saying that this position is winning. And you will see that Korchnoi had to make one more mistake, after which still it wasn't that lost. It's hard to just lose. But the game becomes so difficult that it's not even fair to put a computer assessment. For a human, both the demoralization of having to defend such a bad position, especially when he's such a strong grandmaster, and especially playing against someone like Karpov, who has the patience of a hyena and could just chase you and push you and nag you until eventually you crack, in practical terms is very hard. So we know that black is very, very happy. By the way, I skipped for another game, just if you need to know. Okay. So black played rook b6. Excellent. We're not going to trade for the rook, and the idea is to play rook to b4, creating lateral problems with the pawn on d4. Really, really not very pleasant. So in this position, queen e1. Listen, it's very easy to analyze this position and suggest other moves, like maybe queen d3 or something else, or a3. But I can tell you that, again, the point is just to show fundamentally how hard it is for someone who is playing for the World Championship title, how hard it is for him to defend such a position with white. Really difficult, and he just cracks. So queen e1, not a blunder or anything, by the way. Queen d7, the queen just withdraws back because she wants to have her rook come back and have what we call Alyoshin's gun, 3 major pieces on a file. Rook d3, not my favorite idea. Maybe it would have been better to try to put the rook somewhere on c4, because with the rook on c4, not only do you manage to defend the pawn, but also you leave yourself with some chances on the file. So, rook d3, rook d6. Queen e4, back to defend the pawn on d4. Queen c6. Normally in this position, you don't really want to trade too many major pieces if you are playing against the isolated pawn. But in this position, this is based on a tactical trick that the queen is just being chased. You can't really trade queens. If you trade queens, I take, knight takes. Now there's no way to defend the d pawn except for trying to advance it. But then I have a simple fork. attacking rook d3 and attacking the pawn on d5. So this is really bad news for white. Basically meaning that you cannot trade queens on c6, and the queen gets to improve his position. So he played queen f4, knight d5, queen d2. It's easy to see now with very few minor pieces left, meaning one, that how hard it is for the player with the isolated pawn to play. His pawn is being under attack. When it's not being under attack, the squares around the pawn are being used by the minor pieces, and the bishop looks like it has nothing better than to trade for the knight. And he eventually does it. I think he does it now, or I think he does it right now. And but you'll see that even this is a very dubious idea. It's better to leave the pieces on the board, because with every minor piece you trade, you just make the task much more one-dimensional, just to attack the pawn. Of course, the threat now is knight b4. Attacking the rook. When the rook moves, then this is going to become a problem. So he, after queen b6, excuse me, would like to move. So now he took it. Of course, it would have been much better to play the move a3. But again, for a computer, it's easy to see a3 and say, okay, I'll play it. No emotions, no fatigue, no demoralization. But for a human to play this move is very, very hard. So he took, and of course taking with the rook. And now we have the classical case of three major pieces playing against the isolated pawn, where it's like attacking, 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 defending, and of course more space. Not very pleasant. So rook b3. Again, he's trying to generate some activity, but you'll see that it just falls apart. Queen c6, queen c3. Really praying that he will trade queens and pawn takes. Yeah, that's never going to happen. Queen d7, obviously, and f4. Needless to say that if I get to play e5, I'm going to win the pawn immediately. I'm just going to take it. So he tries this. Once again, this move is played with a small pair. Maybe black is going to go for this rook takes d4 and give up this healthy b7 pawn for the sick d pawn. Of course, there is just no chance with someone like Karpov doing it, and not even if he is drunk at 3 in the morning. So, b6, defending the pawn. Now he is ready to snatch the pawn on d4. So only one move is left, and that's rook b4. So white is pretending to defend everything and keep everything under control, and it's up for black to decide what he wants to do. Of course, now if like a5, then maybe rook c4, and then rook c7 is coming. This is his hope. Rook c4, rook c7. So needless to say that Karpov, yes? Of course. So he plays b5 with a threat of a5. Now if I get the move a5 in, it's the end of the world, because your rook is going to be deprived of squares on the fourth rank, and the pawn is just going to fall, and that's pretty easy. So the threat is something like a5, rook b3, b4 saving all the pawns, queen moves, rook takes d4 with collapse. So he tries to play the move a4, takes, queen a3. So this is the idea, of course. He wants to be able to take and try to prove that the pawn on a7 is as weak as the pawn on d4. But of course, in this position, Karpov saw further. First of all, a5. A fantastic move. He wants him to take with the rook on a4 and not with the queen. And he does, he has to. And now queen b5. Again, we can see, yeah, the pawn on a5 might be a little weak, but the pawn on d4 is much worse. And notice how the queen is babysitting this pathetic rook on e4 that really doesn't want to be there, but he's there. So, okay. Among the ideas is at some point to just play a move like queen e2. Tickle the rook and just penetrate, and this cannot be good news for the white king. So, rook d2, and now e5. Anyways, one of the disadvantages of having to play a move like f4 is that it completely weakens the king side. Throughout this game, white would wish that I could just bring the pawn back to f2. But again, the element is that e5 is always very strong, just winning the pawn. So the problem is, again, like I said, if there was like, let's say, a pawn here and a pawn on h3 and you could hide, it'll be half the problem. But here, with the pawns like this, the king is just super exposed. That is also what is going to decide the game very shortly. So after e5, he takes and takes. I cannot blame white for not wanting to play pawn takes because of rook takes d2. So he played queen a1. This is a good try, trying to protect the last rank from rook e1 check and queen f1 mate, but probably that's not enough. Maybe he should have moved his king away. But again, I think that in the long run, even if objectively it's not completely dead loss, just much better for black, there is no human that can hold this position. It's just not possible. So queen a1, in my opinion, he missed Karpov's next move, which is just very, very strong. Karpov thought to himself, okay, now maybe at some point pawn takes rook could be threatened, and queen f1 might be coming at some moment. And he just thought, let me play a move that keeps all the threats in one shot. In other words, the pressure on d4, the threat along the e file, and the threat on the a4 rook, and he played queen e8. An excellent move. Really, the computer sees it in a nanosecond, obviously, but for grandmasters, also not very, very hard, but very nice. Now the threat is rook to e1, and you have no choice but to take it, because, for example, if king f1, queen c6, threatening queen h1, king here, queen e6, the queen is just improving its position, and again, there's no hope. After king f1, something like rook f5 check, and the queen comes to visit. Notice the passivity of the queen and the rook when it comes to defending the king. Just no hope. So he took, and again, we can see that the difference between the two positions. If I, by some miracle, could just bring this pawn back to here, I would have very few things to complain about. I'm most likely going to be able to hold a draw with not much problem. But the way that it is, with open diagonals and the 7th rank, I have absolutely no hope as white. The game continued only a few more moves. I don't know what Korchnoi could have done differently. I know that the move he played in the game didn't help, but it's already beyond solving. So here, queen c6, threatening mate. So he played check, check, and here, simultaneously defending against the mate and attacking f7. Maybe black will fall into some brain freeze where he takes the rook and queen takes f7 is just perpetual. But needless to say that that's not going to happen. It's even worse than perpetual. Probably you can win this pawn after taking all those pawns. But for Karpov, this is all academic. He just played check and check. And game over. Because after king g1, he can play rook d1, wins the queen and the game. So Korchnoi resigned. By the way, as a side note, it's really funny to me that the computer did not suggest rook d1 here. He suggests, first of all, playing check, and only after here, playing here. Utter accuracy. Computers are just monsters.
Because if you take, and then king d2 is worse than
And then queen d5, and you win the rook in the corner. So the computers are so greedy. So, yeah, so this is, again, the last example. And you can see that Karpov, I guess, learned some lessons over the years. After playing really not very well himself, here he has an opportunity to prove that he is, well, he was always a force to be reckoned with. And he makes Korchnoi look really bad in this kind of a position. Okay, I think we are done for today, and I hope you enjoyed it.